Hey there, gang. Your host, Zach Rutledge, here for another exhilarating edition of Doing Indy. And I'm in the theater, as you can see behind me here, but not just any theater. I'm in the Indiana Repertory Theater, and they're getting ready for the grand opening, the world premiere of a new play called Interpreting William by the playwright in residence, James Still. And the reason this episode is so special is that we're going to have the privilege and honor of sitting down with James to have a great conversation. And we wanted to bring it to you on this week of Doing Indy. Well, as I said, gang, here we are with the playwright in residence, James Still. Took the red eye to be here with us. That's how awesome this guy is. So, James, thank you again for coming. I really, really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So, James, I understand you're from Kansas. You went to KU. You grew up in a small town, Pomona. How do you actually get the ties to Indiana or Indianapolis? I mean, what are those ties?
Well, I think that something about Indiana or Indianapolis, which is where I spend most of my time in Indiana, obviously, something about that is familiar as the Midwest. So when I started commuting to Indianapolis in 1998, it was very easy for me to be here and feel comfortable. The people, like I said, they felt familiar to me, and I felt welcomed. And I think as an artist, being welcomed sometimes is a great place to start because you're in a place where you trust the people you're around and you feel valued by the people that you're creating the work for.
You are the playwright in residence for the IRT, but what exactly does being the playwright in residence for the IRT mean?
Well, we've defined it in our own way. I mean, the IRT had never had a playwright in residence in its 30 plus years of history. I have never been a playwright in residence, so in that way, we could make it up. I see every show. I read plays for Janet in terms of helping suggest plays for the season. In some ways, I think while I'm here, my job is, as a playwright in residence, is to be somebody who cares very much about the work we're doing, but who's bringing a very particular point of view. I am a writer, I am a director. That is the point of view that I bring to my job. When I'm not at the Indiana Rep, I'm still the IRT's playwright in residence. It's just that I may be working on a play or working on a television show somewhere else. But in those situations, I think of myself more as an ambassador for the IRT, where I try to always make sure people know the work that's going on here, to make sure they know that this place exists and that great work is happening.
So how do you go from being the son of a basketball coach in a small town to a playwright, a director, for the stage? How does one make that transition?
It's funny. I actually relate the two things in an odd way. But I actually watch basketball as drama. I watch what's happening on the court, and I watch the audience, if you will, cheering like their life depends on their team winning. And I often think, I wonder how we could get people to be that passionate about theater. How could we get them to feel like their life was depending on whether or not the play ends up the way they want it to. It both requires teamwork in some way. It requires, or it benefits from having a bunch of people watching you and cheering you on. So for me, I suppose it's the rhythm of that affected me in some way. I don't know.
Take me through that process of coming up with this inspiration and getting it on paper and then getting it out on stage.
Well, the first thing is I never know when it's going to happen. So I'm always in this kind of perpetual open state, if you will, hoping that I'm going to be inspired by something, hoping that I'm going to be moved by something, or I'm going to feel privileged to hear a conversation or get a glimpse of somebody's, something very personal happening to them. And so that's the first thing that happens. Many things have to happen between that and opening night of a play. clearly I can't just take something even that I hear or see and really turn that into a play. So it has to go through a process in me. I spend a lot of time scribbling notes about what that is, and that of course leads you to one thing, leads you to another thing, leads you to another thing. You might eventually, the thing you write may feel like it has nothing to do with that original impulse, but it got you to the thing that you finally wrote about. So that's why I never dismiss anything as a possibility, because A, I'm still figuring it out myself after all these years, but B, every play is different. So the way that I would get to Interpreting William, for example, is completely different from the way I would get to Iron Kisses, a play that we did last year. So I have to start over every time. I can't assume that I know how to do this just because I've done it before. And that, I have to say, is nerve-wracking.
So you're getting ready to raise the curtain on for the world premiere of Interpreting William, the play that you did about William Connor, the founder of Connor Prairie. Tell me a little bit more about this play.
I think Interpreting William is a great example of a play I didn't know I was going to write. What interested me about it was this subject of making decisions, life decisions, and trying to understand that. The contemporary story that's happening is about a college professor, a history professor, who's up for tenure, and the project, the book that he's writing in order that he can get tenure, is a book about William Connor. And he goes into this thinking he's this brilliant, hotshot professor. He's going to come up with the real goods and finally crack that mystery of why did William Connor do what he did. And he gets in there and finds exactly what I found, which is that it's more complicated than that. There's a line in the play that history is a mystery based on a true story. And that sounds something about what the play is about to me.
Now, you had the honor of opening The Heavens Are Hung in Black at Ford's Theater. You get the honor of opening Interpreting William here at the IRT in Indianapolis. Compare and contrast the different repertory theaters across the country that you've opened plays at. You know, I don't want to rank them, but just tell me the differences about the overall arts community here in Indianapolis compared to other places you've been.
Well, every theater that I work in has a different vibe, there's no question, and part of that is the community it's based. Part of it is where in the community. The IRT, I think, is partly defined by the fact that we're downtown. For one thing, I feel like, you know, I kind of have a handshake with the audience, which does not mean they're going to like everything I write. I'm not saying that. I'm not trying to write everything that everybody's going to like. I think that's impossible. What I hope, though, the agreement that I've made with our audiences at the IRT is that it's worth the risk to seeing a new play by James Still, which that I don't have at Ford's Theater. I don't have at most other theaters. I don't have that relationship. I like to think of the work that I'm doing at the IRT as a conversation that I'm having with the audience, with the community. I think my nightmare would be as if someone picked up one of my plays and blind and read it and said, well, this has to be by James Still. That doesn't interest me. I'd like to keep people guessing and keep them surprised. So Interpreting William is one more in this big experiment, if you will, that is going on between myself and the IRT and the audiences that come to the IRT.
Interpreting William runs through the 31st of May, and you can get your tickets at the box office or at irtlive.com. Well, that's all we have time for on this episode of Doing Indy. I want to thank the good folks at the IRT and especially James Still for letting us come in here and sit down with him to have a wonderful conversation. So for Doing Indy, I'm your host, Zach Rutledge, and we'll see you next time.